Still inside the cave, one of Valentine's thugs woke myself, Mr. Overgate, and Harkin up. "Glad to see you've stopped wallowing in self-pity. All that crying can get to a man," Valentine began. "Not you," I snapped. "Oh, Mr. Bishop, please. I'm just a man as you are. I just have different ways of seeing things. You see, I see living as precious, but there are so many people out there who squander it, and I just alleviate them of this fruitless existence. Believe me, it is far better where I send them than that which they live in. Take you, Mr. Bishop. After your wife's demise, you left everything and became a vagrant, walking the streets, sleeping near the sewers. What a waste! But I guess I already knew that. That reminds me, your wife's last words. They came back to me last night, when you were crying your pathetic little eyes out. I believe she said, 'Stop, stop.' Sorry. I believe they were her last words to me. How indiscreet of me. Yours were after that. I think it was something like, 'In heaven we meet.' Ring any bells?" It was a phrase we used to say to each other before we went to sleep. But how could he have known it? I did not answer him, I just stared. Maybe I mentioned it to a policeman or a journalist or someone. It was implausible to think he had killed my wife and then came looking for me. But I imagine there wasn't a soul in the city who didn't know of my wife's tragic end. I left it at that. Harkin started yawning, followed by a rumble of his stomach. "When are you going to let us go?" he started. "I've got nothing against you, you neither me. I've got things to do, people to see. I'm a busy man." He smiled. I believed in all seriousness. "You have nothing to do any more. Now sit there and be quiet, or I will have no choice but to end your miserable little life." "Mr. Overgate," called Valentine. Mr. Overgate gave no answer. "Oh, come, Mr. Overgate, it's not that bad. People die all the time. How many people have died in this disaster, and you cry over one individual? How incredibly selfish and self-centered of you. Spare a thought for all the others." But Mr. Overgate did not move. "Leave him be," spoke out Harkin. "Oh, well, I want to give him this, some build-up, but as none of you are in the mood, matron, bring her in." The cave was shrouded in darkness for a moment, as matron and whatever he was carrying on his back filled the hole where the sun came in. He threw his load on the floor right in front of Overgate's feet. Overgate's eyes immediately lit up. It was Mrs. Overgate, and she was alive. "You brought her back to me," cried Overgate, scrambling from his squatting position next to his wife. "Darling, darling," he spoke. But Mrs. Overgate gave no answer. Harkin looked at the woman there, a scar on her stomach, stitched up with what looked like rope. "What have you done to her?" he said. "Matron is a dab hand, you see. That's why I enlisted him. He was bored, and so I let him practice his medical skills on her." I looked at Mrs. Overgate. Her stomach looked full again, as if the matron had put her dead baby back inside her stomach and then sewed her back up with rope. Overgate continued to try and get a response, but there was none. I can only assume Mrs. Overgate suffered some kind of stroke or blood loss to the brain. "Isn't this romantic? Love reunited," smirked Valentine. But this was anything but. Mrs. Overgate had been returned, but maybe it would have been better if she had died, for she was there in body, but not in spirit. She just dribbled and quivered her lip, but not speech, no eye movement came, which Mr. Overgate could recognize as his wife. But Overgate was so pleased to have her back again, it didn't seem to matter much to him. He continued caring for her, touching and stroking her hand gently, as I had seen him play out the night before. My heart melted with this image of love. Then I looked towards the scarly burnt face of Valentine and felt such hatred for him and his way. His evil ideology made me sick. He was a man who cared only for himself, who took joy from the suffering of others. And yet he had been given such a position to exercise his power with that little piece of metal he held in his hands, and it was only that which divided the strong from the weak. I rose up, ready to put my life on the line, but Valentine saw me immediately, cocked his gun, and placed it on Harkin's head. "Go on, Mr. Bishop. Run. Kill me. What care you of this miserable man's life? By all rights he should be dead anyway." You're all going to die anyway, so why not get it all over and done with? Run, you little insect. Be a man. I looked at Harkin, who shivered with fear, his eyes burning straight at me in horror, perspiring like I'd seen no man do. By all rights, we all should be dead, I corrected him. Valentine laughed. I sat back down, and he withdrew the gun from Harkin's sweaty head. Now I think it's time we moved on. Is everything ready, matron? The matron nodded. Two of Valentine's thugs manhandled myself and Harkin out of the cave, holding us tight from behind. Valentine and the matron followed. What about the Overgates? I said. I have no use of them. These lovers can stay together here. I looked towards Overgate with some hope that at least out of his suffering he had been given the chance to maybe nurse his wife back to health. But before I could say anything else, Valentine pressed a button, and two tiny explosions on the roof of the cave went off, and mud started to rain down upon the Overgates. But they didn't move. They lied motionless, in the same position we had left them, just staring into each other's eyes. Mrs. Overgate started to wriggle a little, but no words were spoken. Overgate didn't even flinch, just continued to stroke her hand and gaze into her eyes. "Overgate!" I shouted. "Quick! Get out of there, quickly!" The mud had now covered half of their body and was still raining down. "Get out!" I screamed. "Get out!" But he didn't move, didn't even turn around. And then a mound of solid mud fell on top of them both, burying them alive, as the rest of the mud rained in and filled up the cave. "How touching," said Valentine. I turned around and launched a fist straight at his face, catching him square in the jaw. Blood spat out from his mouth. His thugs regained my arm and pulled me to my knees. "I'll let you have that one. After all, you let me have your wife." He paused with a smile and continued. "And Jenny, I wouldn't worry about the Overgates. Mrs. Overgate wouldn't have lasted long under there. She'd be dead by now, and Mr. Overgate would be holding onto her corpse as he slowly inhales the mud into his lungs." There was a noise, not too dissimilar to coughing, from the pile of mud. "Ah, see, that would be the mud getting stuck in his throat as he breathes it in, causing him to vomit. Won't be long now, and then he will be no more. As in life, they will have died together." Valentine's thugs pushed me and Harkin onwards, and we moved to the edge of the city, high above. We could see the rest. "There is your future," shouted Valentine. I looked towards the city. It had changed since I had last looked. I had thought that only this city was infested with this disease, but it had spread through time to the cities beyond. When I had last the chance on that first day to look, I could see lights and life. But now there were no lights. In the distance I could see the same cloud and fog that I had awoken to as this disease spread out about the land. Valentine was cruelly right. There was no future. This was the end. My hope of leaving the city and getting back to normality was gone. Normality was gone. The dead city was only the beginning. Out there was the end.